Well, first I just wanted to say thanks to the Metropolitan Museum, which it's truly an honor to be here. I've spent a lot of hours in this museum with my sketchbook and my camera, for every Friday, that was the discount day, wasn't it? And thanks again to Denise and Jane for thinking of me for this talk. I was joking with my friend Matt that when I got the email, I thought it was spam, and I almost deleted it. But once I saw it, okay, clear my schedule. And also for Jennifer for her help setting everything up. And it's great to be here with Sinying and Wayne. Sinying I've gotten to know through just kind of random connections through Jingdezhen, and Wayne was my professor in college and has also been an incredible friend to me over the years. So it feels appropriate to be here with both of you. But when asked to talk about how my experience in China affected my work, it's a difficult thing to try to hone down into 15 minutes. Just because there's so many photographs and so many memories and so many friends that you end up meeting there. But there are three areas that I wanted to focus on, and I'm going to show these, sort of wind that together with the experience I had or the kind of work I was making, and then they're represented by three photographs that I took when I was in China. The first one was the effects of material and process. So this was a scene that I came upon walking through the streets of Shanghai, where this object on the left-hand side is, was produced by the act of people throwing out their sticks from the barbecue. And seeing that was just one of the most amazing things I'd ever witnessed. It was something that I think could belong on a pedestal in this museum or in Chelsea. But, there was no real intent behind it. It was just this kind of organic growth that happened, but then also allowing it to just happen. There wasn't a point where the garbage can got emptied out, it just grew, and it was just such a wonderful example of that. And, moving to Jingdezhen, I think it's representative, or at least my experience was representative of that, where I thought that I knew something about ceramics. I went to school for it, I spent quite a bit of time with it, but going to Jingdezhen was a completely different world. Seeing them use this material that was built on a thousand years of experience, they were doing things with it that completely blew my mind. And I think that my whole time there was built around understanding the limitations and then maybe trying to look at ways that you can challenge that expectation of what the material could do. To give a bit of background, the way that I led into going to China was I was a graduate student at Alfred University. These are some pieces from my MFA exhibition, and I was working with porcelain in a way that really tried to test the materiality, trying to let the material move and shift, and building these thick blocks and decorating the surfaces and firing them, cracking them, moving them, flipping them over, and letting that process play out. So I had this opportunity that Wayne was instrumental in. It was after I finished my MFA, I had an opportunity to go to China for a year. To work and teach and also spend time making work. But you can see a bit how that might make sense. I was using blue and white imagery, thinking of pattern as language, transferring between different cultures, and then also trying to expose the material for what it was. And where I landed was, as Wayne mentioned before, the Sanbao Ceramic Center, which was started by Jackson Lee, or Li Jiansheng. And this was the studio that I had the opportunity to work in. So on the bottom right is a shot of the space, surrounded by these beautiful fields, and the top right is literally the view out of the window. I mean, if you were to draw the stereotypical Chinese rice farmer, that's what I looked at every day. So what was wonderful about this being in Sanbao is just outside the city. And Jingdezhen was a very hectic area, but then Sanbao, you come out and it's almost like you're escaping into heaven, and to be able to go back and forth between the two was, pretty ideal, in fact. Now, as I mentioned before, this city has been completely overtaken by this one material of porcelain, or by this history of blue and white, and it's so embedded into the culture that exists there to the point where objects that you would normally think are reserved for, a place of prominence are now being used to hold babies or to take a nap on. So I think that familiarity, you encounter that quite a bit when you're there, and it's almost as if the material just becomes this anonymous thing. the other thing that I was really struck by was how each piece there, even though there's such a massive production of objects, that everything is still touched by hand in some respect. So it's still like the way that objects are produced, it follows almost like the model of the Ford factory, you know, where people are specialists in a certain area, but it's still people, you know. So I think there's still decisions and artistic decisions or creative decisions being made all throughout that process. So even though the objects aren't handmade by one craftsman, they're still all touched by the hand at some point. The other piece of that too is you see so many of these images of deities everywhere, almost to the, you know, where that becomes this almost anonymous thing. So here you just have these, you know, like numbers of, you know, Buddha figures or Guanyin or whatever it might be, and they just recede into the background at some point. Xin Ying showed some images of the large pot factory. So, you know, this again was just the impossibility of what a material can do. And this really kind of blew my mind when I went. But on the left, you know, are all the parts that they would throw for the day, and then on the right is essentially what they get assembled into. And for scale, if you look on the bottom left-hand corner, there's a motorcycle. You know, so this vase must be 15 to 20 feet tall. You know, and that was just kind of a normal line of production that was being produced there. You know, so my initial attempts to try to understand the situation I was in, it took me a little while, but here are some examples. And because I was there for a year, I had also an opportunity to see a lot of other visiting artists from the West come through, maybe spend a couple weeks there, spend a month there. And I noticed that there was a pattern that I also went through where you come and you're trying to get a handle on what exactly the possibilities are, and you end up just doing these kind of initial forays into the resources there. So what I was doing, I was making fragments, having somebody paint blue and white, or making a fragment, have someone paint this China-painted pattern on it. And I can't tell you how many groups of work I saw of somebody's work that was just kind of masked with the China paint pattern or with the blue and white pattern. And I think what ends up happening is that people who really take advantage of the opportunities there come back, you know, or they spend longer time there, just to get a sense of what's available, you know, how you navigate your work through, you know, through the kind of Disneyland ceramic fantasy that exists in Jingdezhen. This is probably my favorite photograph I've ever taken. Again, walking down the street in Shanghai, and there's nothing wrong with this photo, and there's everything wrong with this photo. You know, and what I love about it is it's very representative of just the world that we live in, you know, where we are at this point, how cultures collide and how they end up coexisting with one another. And I think that this idea is still representative in the work that I make today, which I'll show images of later. Part of my responsibility when I was in China was to go out into the schools. So I was doing a lot of visits to universities throughout China, and you know, it was this really wonderful experience because you know, the students are very hungry. They're interested in learning or hearing different perspectives from other people and other artists. And you know, the thing that was the real stark contrast was just the Eastern versus Western education. So I'm Korean American. I grew up in the United States, and you know, most of my art education was based on cultivation of creativity, generating ideas. Whereas in China, you'd walk into a room and it's very academic. So you see, you know, 20 perfectly rendered busts, you know, or these amazing drawings. And, you know, I think that they just represent two ends of the spectrum. Now, I realized along the way that there was kind of a certain irony that existed where here I was, you know, with my Western education coming in and teaching these pottery techniques that really originated in China or in Korea and you know, I struggled with that a bit because I think it was odd because, you know, I was trying to you know, give information that I felt really came from that place of origin. But I think what was interesting for me was how that information just kind of got milled, you know, over the years. The other thing that really affected me that I noticed, when I first got to China, people kept asking, you know, what's your sign? And they're referring to the Chinese Zodiac, which is mostly familiar to us from the placemats in the Chinese restaurant. And it's a very similar question that you might ask here, thinking about astrological symbols. But I did think that people really took this to heart. So when I said that I was a rabbit, they would that was the point of understanding who I was. That was the beginning point for them. And, luckiest of all signs, you're talented, articulate, affectionate yet shy, seek peace throughout your life, marry a sheep or a boar. So I found out later, because the Eastern calendar is a lunar calendar, and then we go by the Gregorian calendar, I'm not a rabbit, I'm actually a tiger. So for 30 years of my life, I'd been thinking I was a rabbit, and they're very, very different, as you can see. And I also found out I was a tiger born in the year of the tiger, which, judging by your faces, I realize you all know how important that is. And, and it just threw me for a loop, because I didn't realize that until that moment, and suddenly I shifted the way that I was introducing myself to people I would meet, and then their perception of me was changing. Like it would change in that split second. So, that, I thought quite a bit about that, and I still struggle with it. And I think the other side of that, this idea of perception was, as a Korean American working in China, was a very different experience for, say, my friend Paul Mathieu, who's a French-Canadian artist, tall, white hair, wears red pants, big, gregarious kind of fellow. But then I could recede into the background in a way and then just decide when I would reveal my true identity as a foreigner, So that was another part of my experience, I think, that was very unique that I still think quite a bit about today, like how you assimilate. So this kind of led to a body of work where I was getting away from making some of those more abstracted fragments and then trying to build pieces that dealt more with specific imagery. And also, I'd never modeled a bust before, so I wanted to try to see what that experience looked like. Some work that I became very interested in when I was there are these funerary objects, or huanping, that were placed in the tombs of people who had passed away as a place for the soul to reside, or as a place for the to provide peace and happiness in the future. And I think I'm a bit conflicted sometimes. This piece on the right is actually here in the Met. It's a beautiful arrangement of objects, but there's so much construction taking place in China that these objects are just being unearthed and then displaced. So that system of belief that this was a place for the soul to reside suddenly doesn't reside there anymore. It's not with that body. And and like I said, I'm conflicted sometimes because it's a system that we don't really believe in anymore, and we have our own systems of understanding, and who knows what's going to happen in another 1,000 years. So, and I made these pieces that were kind of based on that, and this is actually a piece I made at the Pottery Workshop in Shanghai. Caroline Cheng had let me work there. On the far right, the series started because there was a dog in Jingdezhen that just disappeared one day, and nobody really seemed to know what happened or where he went. And I just thought that was striking because it's such a different, the animal politics are very different. So I wanted to make a commemorative urn for this dog, Holly. Unfortunately, this is the only photograph I have of Holly, and she's the one in the middle. So I think she really deserved the urn. And the third photograph, an area is division of skill. And I want to say division of skill as opposed to division of labor, but the amount of expertise that existed in Jingdezhen was just kind of uncanny. People were very adept in their area of study or of their area of work. And if this is a picture of Yi Sifu, or Yi, Mr. Yi, you can call him. And if you look closely, I worked right behind him for a good part of the year. If you look closely, he smoked his cigarette down to the filter and the ash is just hanging there, which gives you some indication of how careful he was and how little he moved and how much he was paying attention to his work. And he would help me and do a lot of the China painting on my surfaces. So this idea for me, coming from the educational background I had, I was used to doing everything, mixing the clay, making the pots, doing the painting. And because Jingdezhen was set up the way that it was, I was able to let go a little bit of that and try to look for opportunities to move through ideas differently, utilizing some of the local resources. a couple other folks that were pretty instrumental for me. On the left was, as Xinjing showed, Mr. Zhou, and just like Picasso with plaster. Unbelievable how he could do things. And then on the right, the woman who I ended up renting a space down in the sculpture factory to be closer to some of the artisans. And they were all wonderful people. I spent a lot of time trying to communicate with them, and they laugh at me and what I was doing, and but they would also help me out as much as they could. So this was a shot of another space that I ended up renting and the production of objects that I was creating from that. Here, I just like this photograph because it's, the rabbit head sort of mixed with all these other iconographic imagery. At the end of my time there, I had a factory owner let me create an installation in one of the spaces. And this was the first time that I was able to see the work finished in a grouping. A lot of the workers were able to see, and my friends in the community. So, there were different series of works that I was creating from that. And then I had an opportunity to invite everybody out. So we had like an opening for the exhibition. I found out where to buy a keg in Jingdezhen, and then we had food and played music. And it was a really wonderful opportunity for us to see, or for these folks that I'd been working with to have a chance to see what the finished product was and what the context of the work would be. And this is a photograph of really all the people who I ended up working with, the mold maker, the person who pressed the objects, the person who made the china paint. And then I was also working with a table maker who made porcelain picnic tables, and would work with him to try to create different proportions for these things. So this was a pagoda-inspired object called Instinct and Consequence. And I was also playing with numbers. Like the number 4 is a very unlucky number in China. And then there were just little details and elements, like holding a bouquet of 13 flowers. This piece was called As Buddha, so I was creating a series of objects that were based on different identities, assumed identities. On the left is As a Good Soldier, which was based on a lot of the Cultural Revolution imagery that was still around Jingdezhen. And then on the right is As Leslie Chung from Farewell My Concubine. This piece was called Year of the Rabbit, which was carved by a local artisan. And then this was the finished urn for Holly. So some of the work from that, so I spent 2005 and 2006 in China, and since then, I've moved back to North America, and wanted to show some work and that's a bit more current, but utilizing some of those same ideas. So here's a piece that's based on those Huanping jars called In the Name of Tradition. And I made this when I returned to Montana as the director of the Archie Bray Foundation, utilizing some of the architecture of the beehive kilns that are on site. This piece is called Gilded Pastures. This one is called Birds of North America. This one's called Another Time and Place, because there must have been dinosaurs roaming through those landscapes at some point. And then most recently I've been working on a series of these deconstructed vessels that kind of question intent and how value gets assigned to that, and where that line of success and failure begins and ends. So this piece is called Jar with Dragon. And I'm using a mix, I think that there's certainly a Chinese influence, but a lot of my work as well is influenced by my Korean heritage. So I'm looking at a lot of Joseon Dynasty porcelain vessels. I use an inlay technique called sangam, which is, still referencing blue and white, but it's a traditional Korean technique as well. This piece is called Vase with Gold Butterflies. And I did want to mention, I have an exhibition down at Greenwich House Pottery in about a month, April 11th through May 9th, and I'll be showing this kind of work, but I hope you can join me for that. And again, just wanted to say thank you to everybody.